Will City. Self-care Sunday. Yo. I'm like self-care on Sundays with a day off on Monday. Private jet on the runway, taking off, going one way to the top. Whoa. Who said the sky is the limit when I'm high is my vision? On Facebook Live, going live in a minute. Don't mind me, I'm just minding my business. Breaking news, doing interviews, but it's not about me, I'm doing this for you. Matter of fact, no, I'm doing this for proof that a self-care Sundays and dreams come true. They really do.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Self-Care Sundays, where we have comedian Jay Malsky. Jay is a New York-based sketch comedian, drag queen, and religious community leader. Before we get started with Jay, I want to ask for your help supporting the podcast via Patreon. Patreon allows supporters of the show to donate a monthly amount to help with our costs, including monthly maintenance fees, and to help pay our audio engineer. We'd also like to raise enough money to hire a transcription service to make our episodes more accessible to everyone. If you'd like to help us out, please check out patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. That's patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Thank you in advance. It's the generosity of our listeners that helps this information become accessible to so many people in the first place. Let's get started. How are you doing today, Jay?
Oh, I'm doing great. Just wonderful. I just got back from vacation. So I'm at that age where you have to build in an extra day between the end of your vacation and the start of your work week.
Yep, I totally feel that.
So today's my Sunday of okay, yeah, I got in late Saturday night. Now I'm just getting back into the swing of things, and I'll be ready to go about my day, my week tomorrow.
Yeah. So if you could maybe just start us off by telling us about what a typical day for you looks like and how self-care fits into that.
Yes. So I'm one of these comedians and actors that still has a day job, which I actually am fortunate enough to really love and enjoy, and allows me the freedom to also do my art. So my typical day starts with waking up and doing some form of exercise, which is to me a huge part of my self-care. It's the hour a day that I get to myself, that I get to think about what are the things that I'm trying to accomplish in this day. There's nobody bothering me. There's no noise. There's usually a lot of music. So I guess that's not true. There isn't no noise, but it's a very, me being an athlete and riding a bike or taking a swim or going for a run, or just spending 45 minutes at the gym doing some combination of all three is very meditative for me. And so I really like to start my day doing that, just kind of centering myself, getting myself in a good place, because, then I go to work and it's usually an 8-hour day, some of which maybe I'm going to an audition in the middle of it. And I'm trying to, then I have to find 5 minutes to kind of focus myself and get myself in a mindset to do an audition. And then after work, I usually have a rehearsal or a show. Sometimes both, sometimes more than one of both. And then I come home and I go to sleep if I'm lucky by midnight. And then I'm up again the next day, kind of doing the same thing.
So how did you discover that these habits are what work for you and are important to you, and kind of staying centered and grounded and feeling like you're taking good care of yourself?
I think really a lot of it is, I realized at a young age I like compartmentalizing. I'm very organized. And so being able to block my day out alleviates a lot of my anxiety, and I think doing the work that I do as a performer and a comedian is, most people have so much anxiety, and this is their outlet for getting it out. This is how they do that. And so I think a huge part of that is self-care, because you just, living with anxiety it's one of the, you don't get over it. You kind of learn to cope with it. And for me, exercise has been a huge part of that, as well as religion. I was raised Catholic, and there's just something very comforting to me about it, about the words that are in the Bible that, and I shouldn't say the words, I should say the stories in the Bible, because they're fables. You can believe them to be historically accurate or not, but to me they are just stories that help you live your life in the best way that you want it to be lived. So to me, I think my self-care, I learned at an early age, came from my relationship with God and my belief in Jesus Christ. That was a meditative thing for me, a way for me to focus and work on being my best self. And then as I continue to get older, I think exercise played a part in that, helping me, I would say my Sunday at church is like kind of gets me through the week. And then my exercise gets me through the day.
Yeah, I really like this idea of having both things that you do on like a weekly basis and then also on a daily basis, because I think that we need both, right? And then I imagine that there are things you do like even on a quarterly basis or like a yearly basis, right? To kind of like check in. And I think that kind of keeps you fine tuned and like and then it's not all like bottling up, waiting for like the one moment of release.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally true. It's funny. I said I just got back from vacation. What I was doing was I had a triathlon I did last Monday. I was in Austin, Texas, and it was an Olympic triathlon. It was so great. It was so awesome, wonderful. And this is the third one I've done. I've learned after so many years of racing that you do have to give your body a little bit of time to recover. And so I was, the rest of the week I was just like visiting friends and family, but I was not exercising. I gave myself a rule of like, do not go for a run, do not do any of that, because you could really injure your body, and I don't want to do that. And I also, of course, missed out on church because I was in Texas. I just didn't get to go to church. And so
because there are no churches in Texas.
There's no churches that are gonna. There's no churches that are gonna love me. I mean, that might not be true. I was in Austin. Austin's a pretty liberal bastion. It was just one of those things. I was busy prepping for a race.
Yeah.
But by the time I got to Friday and Saturday, I noticed I was like having an insane amount of panic attacks. And I was like, why am I struggling to just sit here and hang out with my friends and just like go to a Shania Twain concert, which is what I did, which is wonderful. But I was throughout the day, I was having so much anxiety. And then this morning I got on my bike and rode over to church and rode back home to come do this interview. And I was like, oh, that's what it was. I missed out on the church and I missed out on the exercise. And my mind and spirit were like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
You're not feeding me. You're not giving me the self-care I need,
Yeah. I think it's also that like, it's hard to be still. Like when I find it really hard when I'm on vacation, like that there's nothing to do and really to not like, let my mind start racing on some nitpicky thing, but to actually take the time to just be like still. I think it's actually really challenging.
Especially when you're from New York and you go to a place that's not New York, like Austin, Texas, or Jensen Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
It's so still and relaxing there. And it's just like it is hard to like come down from that.
Yeah.
From being constantly around a whole bunch of energy all day, every day.
Yep. So I want to go back and ask you about two specific things that you were talking about. One was kind of the anxiety of being a performer. And I wanted to ask you about kind of validation and performance and how you set goals and how audiences differ. And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, you're never happy with your performance. It's very rare. I've found as an artist that I'm always like, oh man, I really screwed that up. Even if people are like, that was amazing. And I'm like, nah, I screwed that one thing up and I'm never going to forgive myself for that.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. I think that's who we are. I was watching the David Letterman series on Netflix where he interviewed Tina Fey and he also interviewed Jerry Seinfeld. And both of them had these differing points of view, and that all comedians are. Tina Fey was like, I think all comedians are broken in some way, and Jerry Seinfeld was like, I believe everybody's broken. Basically, it was like you can be a bread truck driver and be a broken person. But I kind of agree with both of them. I think there are very healthy people there are people who get addicted to so many things, who feel like they can't perform unless they're on some sort of a drug, and then they get addicted to drug, and then they get addicted to the performance, and they get addicted to fame, and it becomes the spiral. I personally have not found that. I've found that I probably have issues like everybody else. I kind of fit more into the Jerry Seinfeld school of thought on that, and that like we're all just trying to be the best versions of ourselves. And in one way I might be broken, but in another way I'm really whole. And to me, that's what self-care is really at the end of the day, is just trying to become better version of yourself over the long haul, over a long period of your life. And so, I kind of accept that there are going to be shows and there are going to be performances that I really hate, that I really don't think are good. But that also doesn't mean that they weren't good. That it's just kind of my own, it's almost like body dysmorphia for performance, like performance dysmorphia. like I can take the time to know I did a good job. I gave all I could and I had a really fun time. However, there are all these things that I know I did wrong and I wish that I had done better and that I can work on for next time. But to accept it and say, I did it and I'm moving on and, I'll learn and take what I can from it, but not to beat myself up all the time about everything, which I think I definitely did when I was first starting out. I got way too in my head.
Yeah.
And I think that's because that's also the thing about a lot of it was just in a show that was a lot of improvised based. And I felt like there were times we would do a show and one thing was said, somebody else said that I took to be like, I just took it one way and I felt so in my head. I was so in my head and I felt like I could not perform. I could not get the words out of my mouth. I could not do the job I was supposed to do. And I think to me, those are moments where I really have to like breathe and say, you have a job to do. You're going to be fine. Like you have almost like a mini anxiety attack right there on stage. And you're just like, okay, but I can't just bail on this. I can't just give up, So finding ways to kind of alleviate that voice of doubt and that voice that it's only in your head,
Yeah.
You are still an active person in the world and you have an obligation to be present.
So I think that's actually really interesting because a lot of our guests in season 1, we were kind of broadly thinking about self-care and less about specific habits, talked a lot about the importance of being present. And I found that to be something really useful in my life. Mm-hmm. And it does sound like improv is very stressful and it's all about being present. So what do you do? How do you practice? How do you hone those skills to be present so that you can be responsive and sharp and ideally funny when stuff comes your way?
I think the first rule of improv is yes and, but I really kind of think that isn't necessarily the most important rule because of course, yes, you have to listen to what somebody's saying and respond and be positive about it and accept their reality. But those are kind of the training wheels that you put on. I think to really ride the bike of improv as a performer is listening and knowing that the answer is not, this is what I tend to do. And whether it's improv or whether it's, a solo show, anything, or a sketch show. For me, knowing that I can get distracted by the audience responding one way or not responding one way, or one of my fellow actors kind of dropping something, or just there are a million outside forces that can affect what you're trying to do. And for me, just remembering that the answer is in the person I'm on stage with and what they're saying to me in that moment. So I think I've definitely trained my brain to, like, when I have a moment of self-doubt, to be like, stop listening to the voice in your head and listen to the person that is talking to you right now, because that's where the answer lies. The question you're supposed to answer, the thing you're supposed to say next, that's where it lies. Not with the audience, not with the voice in your head telling you suck. It's the other person on stage trying to make art.
Yeah. So kind of shifting gears from the art and the improv scene, we were also talking a little bit earlier about religion and how that's an important self-care practice for you.
Yeah.
I'd love to know, kind of in vein of the joke about Austin, how do you navigate membership and exclusion as a Catholic gay man?
Yeah, it is very difficult. And I think that that's a great word is the conflict. Because there are times where I read a piece of news or I read something that the Pope says that, and this Pope has been great, very, very definitely making a lot of changes in the world. But then every once in a while he says something, I'm like, what? What are you doing? What are you saying? Or, even our Archbishop in New York, who, of course, like the week before the election was like, well, you have to vote for the candidate that's pro-life. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Just because Donald Trump says he's pro-life now, that's who all Catholics have to vote for? Are you kidding me? There's more to life than abortion. How about I could go on forever. And that's the thing, is it gets in your head. You're just like, what are you? And it's so funny to saying this. It's so similar to being on stage and getting distracted by the voice in your head or getting distracted by the audience. For me, it's the same thing. It's about what happens when I am at church with my community of people that choose to celebrate God's love and the word of Christ at St. Francis de Sales on the Upper East Side. And it's this group of people. It's this group of people that I find God. It's this group of people that centers me and makes me feel good and fills me with joy and helps me be the best person that I can be throughout the rest of my week. It's very much for me it's the community of people that you can celebrate with. And that's one element of it, now that I'm saying it out loud. The other element is just like your relationship with God, which is the prayer, your prayer. It's your meditative moments that you spend talking to the good part of yourself. It's, for me, I think my exercise is a form of prayer. When I'm on a bike for 45 minutes and I'm just talking to myself, to me, that's talking to God. That's me telling myself, here are the things you have to do today. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do all these things well? And how are you going to do all these things being a good person? Or if you're having a fight with a friend and you're like, I want to be a good friend, but that person is really irritating me right now, and I need to say that it's okay for me to separate this and just like take a pause and take a moment on our friendship for my own well-being. Those are like, having dialogue with yourself is, to me, a form of prayer, and dialoguing and, with God is really a form of prayer and self. So yeah, anyway, sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying that there's a lot of conflict in the institution of Catholicism itself, but that if you weed through it and remember what your relationship with God does for you, you'll be fine. That's the step to hold on to.
Yeah. For you, was there ever a time where religion was a negative or challenging force in your life?
I will say that I've been openly gay since I was in high school, and I went to a Catholic high school. I was very supported by the priests at my Catholic high school. So I always had a very, very positive relationship with my church and my sexuality, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The priest in my high school ran my gay support group. It was fascinating. It was wonderful. And that has kind of continued throughout my life. Everywhere I've been, I've always been able to find an inclusive, queer affirming Catholic church, which is I feel really lucky to have found that. But I also have found that when I tell people that I'm Catholic just out in the real world, I have faced more animosity and more people being like, how can you do that? How dare you? How can you be a Catholic? Than I have for being a gay person, for saying that I'm gay. I feel like I have received more hate for being a Catholic than I have for being a queer person, which is fascinating to me. And it is hard. And I also, in those moments, I can take a step back and realize, the institution of Catholicism has hurt so many people. They have hurt so many people in every way by excommunicating gay people and trans people, and I still hear those stories, which are very sad, by the sex abuse scandal, with the priests being inappropriate and molesting children. Just, those are real things that happened. And there are people that have been hurt by that. And by me having a positive experience with Catholicism doesn't in any way negate the negative, hurtful relationship that those people have had with the church. And they have every right to feel that way. It's just interesting to me that in those moments I try and say, listen, I understand that, but I had a positive experience. And it is very difficult for people to hear my story who have been hurt by the Catholic Church. And I understand that.
Do you think it invalidates their pain somehow to hear your story?
It's possible. And you know what? Now that you say that, that's definitely something that I should kind of keep in the back of my head, because of course, in those moments, I don't go, don't go wild. And I'm like, well, let me tell you about my story. I try to be, even if somebody's being aggressive with me, I always try to lower my voice and just try and listen to them And I definitely don't think like I try and evangelize my religion with force. I just share my story. And if my story can in any way be positive for somebody else and help them reconcile their pain in their life, and or just open up their mind a little bit in a way that they didn't realize they were closed off, then that's all I can do. That's really all I can do.
Yeah. I think that's right. But I think and it's hard. Like, why should one person's positive experience, negate someone's negative experience? But I guess it's challenging.
Oh, of course it's challenging, and they have every right to feel that way, And that's the thing is, I also have a respect for a lot of other religions. There's a lot of, I don't think the Catholic Church is like this in my experience, but a lot of evangelical Christians believe that they are, it's their way or the highway. They're the only people getting into heaven. Everybody else is going to hell. And I don't ascribe to that. I think we're all human beings and we're just trying to find our way through this world. And it's like Pope Francis said, I don't know if there was this great video that I just saw where a little boy was trying to ask him a question. He was so nervous about it. So he whispered it into the Pope's ear, and the Pope said, with his permission, I'd like to share his question, which was that, he was baptized. This kid was like 8 years old. He was baptized. His father had all of his children baptized, but his father was an atheist and he just died. And he was crying and he was saying, Pope Francis will my father be in heaven? And it was so beautiful to watch Pope Francis's response to this, which was not just a simple yes or no, but he took the time in the moment to restate the child's question and say that your father obviously raised you to be a good person. He raised you to be kind and to be able to share your feelings and your emotions in a public space. Your father was a good man. And I cannot imagine God in Judgment Day looking at your father who has raised wonderful children, who has been a good man, and saying he doesn't belong in heaven, even though he was an atheist. It was so powerful. And it's those kind of answers that we need to be finding. It's almost finding questions to the questions,
Yeah.
Because that is what religion is. If we look at it from a historical perspective, religion is just the question to why the hell are we here? What are we doing? And it is easy to kind of put rules into place because it helps people survive. It gives people boundaries. Boundaries are good. It teaches us how to live. But, you get to a point where the rules are excluding people and you're using the rules to condemn people and put judgment on people and hate people. And that is not at all what I think the answers to the questions are. I think the answers to the questions should always be rooted in love and kindness. And so, I'm so thankful for Pope Francis, because even though he might say or do things that in my mind, I'm still like, okay, those are a little backwards. Those aren't, that's not what we should be saying or doing. I do think that he is asking us to ask questions, which no pope in a long time has done that. Most popes have just been there to say, well, here are the rules. Here's what it is. But yeah. I don't know.
Do you think that, obviously your identity ties into your habits with regards to religion, but I wonder if you think that your identities tie into what types of self-care practices, whether that's exercise or, vacations, like whether they tie into other habits that you've done or how you've formed habits.
What do you mean by identity? Do you mean
like you are white, you are a man, you are gay, like we have all kinds of identity.
Oh, yeah. I just didn't know if you meant one specifically.
No.
I think, of course they do. For me being a Catholic from a young age, I learned that prayer was meditative. My religion allowed me to study other religions, I've studied Buddhism and I've learned about the art of meditation there. And my mother used to take me to yoga classes when I was 12. And I think all of that definitely continues in my day to day. And I think it all intersects. So there is most shows that I do, especially if they're really shows that I really feel strongly about, that I really, really, really want to perform well in. I say a prayer I just go off in a corner very quickly and I just say a prayer of, kind of God, give me strength, give me the ability to do this well, to perform well. I pray to people, both my grandfathers died. One of my cousins, who was one of my best friends, who was also an actress, died when she was 33. And so I think of them, I pray to them before I go on stage, because I think it's just, for me, it gives me a little bit of strength. It helps me focus, to be able to feel like those people and their energies are with me on stage. That I think that helps me to really do well. So for me, the idea of exercise and my religion and my performance, they all tie in together. A lot of times, if I have a show, I also go for a run before. If I have a lot of anxiety, I will just be like, I need some time to get out of the other part of my day, to really think about what I need to do now. And I'm just going to get some energy out that way. So to me, it all is one. It's all trying to find those good things in any moment.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. I'd love to talk a little bit about, we didn't really talk a ton about drag, and I'm not sure how familiar our listeners are with even what it means to be a drag queen. So could you just tell us for a second?
I feel like I should caveat this with, I always called myself a drag comedian, but when the religious right got a hold of me over the last 3 years, they kept slapping that label of drag queen on me as it was an insult. So since then, I'm like, yeah, sure, call me a drag queen. I love it. If the religious right hates it, I love it. But so for me, a lot of my drag that I do is performance based. It's characters that I play, and I don't do drag. You're never going to see me on RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, I guess never say never, but I don't do drag like that. But I do drag, I do comedy. I play characters that are women, and I do a lot of impressions. I do Celine Dion. I do Cher. And I always do something, it's very character based. Like when Trump first got elected, Cher was tweeting so much. She still does, but she really hates Trump, and her tweets are bonkers and wonderful. And so I would do this act where I would do this character where it was Cher just trying to sing If I Could Turn Back Time. But after every few lines, she would just break down and she'd be like, I want to share some of my tweets with you. I really wrote this. And I would project it up, or I'd just read the tweet out. So, it was just very funny. Anyway.
It sounds very funny. I'm just listening.
I wish I could remember. I haven't done it in so long, but it's definitely in my character reel. So check out my character reel on jmalsky.com for that. But for me, sorry, I don't even remember what the question was. I know you just asked me about drag.
Just kind of if you could just explain what drag was.
Oh yeah. So yeah, and I think we're at a wonderful place in our society, especially in New York and in the comedy scene, where for years I think drag was this very specific thing that you lip synced to artists and you gave a performance, and your job was to look beautiful and look as much like a woman as possible. And that still exists, and that's still there, and it's wonderful, and it's so entertaining. I love going to drag brunch. Believe me, I'm fascinated by queens that can do drag brunch. But I think now we've definitely kind of, as any art does, kind of evolves. And there are drag queens that are comedians that just do comedy sets. There are comedians drag comedians that do online stuff only. Basically, there's a great friend of mine, Chris Burns, does a lot with Betches. I think it's mainly an Instagram website, and he does so many drag characters there. And it's not, it's not drag in the sense of what you would find on RuPaul's Drag Race, but I think there are so many people reinventing what it means to be a drag queen and reinventing what it means to be to have a gender, because that's really what I think it's becoming. It's an exploration of one's gender and how they can express themselves, which I think is really, really cool.
In line with that kind of self-expression, do you think that drag is a form of self-care for some people? Do you think that drag changes how people practice self-care?
Absolutely, because I think if we go according to what I believe self-care is, which is self-care is the long-term practice of becoming the best version of yourself, then I think when you discover that moment where you like being a drag queen and that you can perform this way and you can bring joy to other people's lives by performing and by putting on a wig and heels and makeup and doing what you find funny, sharing what you find funny and interesting and entertaining about the world. That to me is a moment of self-care, because you are becoming a better version of yourself. I mean, I definitely feel like that. I mean, I have the privilege of going through this world as a white man. I understand that, and I recognize that all the time. But for me, putting makeup on and making myself feel beautiful in that way it fills me with such joy. It really, truly does. And I don't know if I think identified exactly why. I don't know if I can put a final answer on why it makes me happy to do it. I can philosophize why it does, because I can see joy on people's faces and I hear their laughter when I perform. But I also look in the mirror and I just think, oh gosh, great cheekbones. God gave you great cheekbones, and let's highlight them. All of those things I think are in pursuit of that best self, which again, my kind of definition of it is of self-care is trying to become your best self.
Yeah, I love that. So I don't know, as a final question, what's a self-care habit that you're working on developing?
Let me say something small. I am trying. Oh no, here's a good one. I started doing the keto diet like 4 or 5 months ago, and I love it so much. It's really has changed my relationship with food. It's amazing. So, of course, doing this triathlon that I did on Monday, I was just expending so much energy that I needed carbs way more than the diet allows. So I went off of it for a little bit, but to kind of come back from vacation and finishing that triathlon, getting back to a more balanced kind of exercise routine, I'm also excited to get back on the keto diet because it really does make me feel so much better. It's changed my relationship with food and how I feel throughout the day. So that is something very, very specific in terms of self-care that I am going to be like working on for the rest of the summer. Cause I want to have a nice beach body. I'm going to be spending a lot of time on Fire Island and I want to look decent. I want to not hate the way I look.
Fair. I think we should all not want to hate the way we look.
I mean, that's a good place to to end, don't you think? Let's try not to hate the way we look.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and to thank our listeners for listening to another episode of Self-Care Sundays. Before we wrap up here, I want to offer a special shout out to our patrons on Patreon. Their generosity makes our show possible and are a huge reason why you're hearing this episode today. We are especially grateful for the support of our super contributors, Vicky B, Renu J, Brady K, Bill S, and Embershot. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name at the end of our episodes, please check out patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Again, that's patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Also give us a follow on Twitter at Self-Care Sundays and on Facebook at Self-Care Sundays. Jay, thank you so much for coming on the episode. It was great having you here. Where can our audience find you on social media?
They can find me on Instagram and Twitter at just simply J Malsky. I really should get something better. I should be more funny about that and get a good handle, but I like J Malsky, so that's where we are there. And if you want to see any of my shows, my calendar is up to date on jmalsky.com.
Great. I'd like to thank the person who made our show art, Leah Horowitz, and the amazing artists who make our show music, For Real City. On behalf of our producer, Jess Thalwar, our communications interns, Kennedy Freeman and Sophie Gomez, our audio engineer, Kato Zane, and myself, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week when we discuss self-care with Black feminism scholar and Bitch Media editor-in-chief, Yvette Dion. You won't want to miss it.